Alright, so I'm going to start by answering the questions that were sent to me, and then I'll get into the lesson that I created. So to start with the first question, how do you develop rapport with students so that you are able to provide instruction feedback? I have a couple things I like to do, and I think the first and most important thing is just developing relationships with your students. I think it's really important that you just start those relationships super early on, so first day of school. I like to do get to know you activities, just to really get to know what my students' interests are, what their hobbies are, and things like that. And that just helps develop that rapport so the students feel like they know you a little bit more and you know them a little bit more, just to kind of create that relationship with them. I also think, like I mentioned, it's really important to just know your students' interest levels and kind of what they find interesting. That way you can help them, and especially when giving like instructional feedback, you can maybe connect with them on something that they connect with and say, like, you know, you're really interested in this book, or, you know, maybe they're really interested in science. So maybe when getting them to read books or something, you know, I would go and find some really good science books that they could read to make sure that I'm matching their interests with what they're interested in, and it just helps provide that feedback for them and develop that kind of rapport with your students. The second question about demonstrate leading a conversation addressing a student who failed to demonstrate mastery on comprehension and application of literacy concept. I think the first thing I would do is start with something that they did really well in the literacy concept. So, for example, if they were really well at, you know, knowing their sounds, I might start with, hey, you know, you did a really nice job identifying your sounds, and I really appreciated that you were putting in the work and you really showed mastery of that skill. And so that's a really great place to start. I think by starting with something they did really well, it helps them not only feel confident in themselves, but it helps them to feel like they are just doing well and they're not just starting with the negatives, because that can make students feel really down on themselves if all you do is talk about the negatives and what they're doing really poorly in, instead of mentioning what they do really well at. I also think that another thing I would do is, after addressing their strengths that they showed, I would go and start with going back over the concept that they missed. So if it was a worksheet, I would go maybe back over the worksheet with them and say, let's go through these corrections together if I have time. Otherwise, I might say, can you work on these independently and see if you can figure out what you missed, maybe get them started on it, and then have them come back and work through the corrections that they made on that. Because I think it's important to have students go back and make those corrections. That way they can see, you know, what they missed, why they missed it, and it's not just me telling them, this is what you did wrong, you know, and then they're not getting off easy with just getting the answers given to them, but they have to actually go back and think about what they missed. I also like to give students who missed something a little bit more practice with it. So maybe they had one worksheet that they did with a literacy concept, and then I might go back and say, here's more problems and more examples that you can work on with this concept. So go and do that, you know, maybe for homework one night, that's a little extra homework that they're doing, or you know, it's something that they could do in class. If they finish up work early, maybe they're a really fast student, so they have a little extra time in class to work on it. And I think that allows them to just, not only they're going back and making those corrections on the original worksheet, but then they're also able to go back and get a little bit more practice with it. That way they can feel confident moving forward with those skills, instead of just being like, okay, I made the corrections, but I still don't really understand what I'm doing. So how do I move forward with this? So I think it's really important they do some work independently, and then I would check back in with them maybe the next day, kind of follow up and say, how did that go for you? Kind of walk through the problems and see, again, if they missed a lot, maybe again go back over those problems with them, and just kind of keep doing that until I feel like they're demonstrating that they have knowledge on that skill. And finally, with developing a student's skills to show mastery, I think if it's an occurring thing that's happening, you know, maybe they've tried a couple of worksheets and they're still not getting the concept, that's when I would reach out to parents and maybe either have a phone call or have a meeting with them and say, you know, this is where your student is struggling, and how can we work together both at home and in the classroom to really get your students to be where they need to be for grade level. And I think it's just so important to get the parents on board with you, especially early on. Now I know I said, after a couple times, because I obviously, if it's, one worksheet that the students struggle with, I don't feel like it's necessary to get the parents involved then. But if it's something where I feel they're continually struggling with it, or it's going to be a problem for them, I would like to get the parents involved early on, so that way they can see I'm trying to make an effort to help their child, and they can also know what they need to be doing at home. Because I think, especially with elementary students, it's important to get parents involved at the beginning of the year, but also as the year goes on with whatever they're struggling with, because it helps them feel like they're a part of their child's learning. And I think that's really important. So those are kind of my steps of what I would do to kind of address a problem that a student is struggling with. And I think, so getting the student more practice, involving the parents so they can feel like they're a part of helping their child as well, and just making sure we're working together to make sure the child is going to master that subject. Finally, demonstrate how you would facilitate a conversation with a teammate who may have a difference of opinion with you regarding instruction, discipline, etc. So I think, especially being at a Christian school, I think it's a really unique opportunity that we have, and that we have common ground. We have our relationship with Christ, we have the Bible guiding us, and so I think we can come into conversations like this with a spirit of love and grace towards the other person, instead of feeling like you're just gonna attack the other person or make them feel, I don't know what the right word is, but make them feel like they are doing something wrong maybe. So I think as Christians, we have an opportunity to approach these situations with love and grace towards the other person. So I think the first thing I would do when approaching this conversation is just start with and say, what are the problems that you see with what I'm trying to do with my instruction, or whatever else might be wrong, and that they're kind of seeing a difference in opinions than me. Because I think it's important to not just start with me saying, well, this is what I would do, this is why I'm doing it, you need to go and do your stuff and I'm going to do my stuff. But I think by approaching it with saying, first of all, let me hear your opinion of what's going on, will really help kind of ease the situation, so it's not just me pointing fingers at them. I also think it's really important that as you have those conversations, so you can start by saying, what am I doing wrong, or where do you see the problems in this situation? Having their feedback, and then I could kind of explain my side of the situation. This is why I'm doing the curriculum this way. This is what I think will help with it. That can help us kind of see both sides of the situation. And then from there, moving on to just trying to find a commonality or agreement. And I think it's important to remember that as teachers, we all have different ways that we think that students will learn. I think, some teachers like to do really visual things, they might have lots of hands-on things. Other teachers like to do more like textbook work, and kind of, there's lots of differences in education, but I think coming at it with an open mind and also realizing that there are those differences helps to create common ground between the two teachers, and really realize that, you're doing this for the benefit of the students. So if I can learn something from another teacher and realize, I don't have to just be using worksheets, but I could be using this to help my students learn, is really important. And so I think by approaching it with the aspect and mindset of love and grace, and also with an open mind of learning kind of how another teacher would teach their student, really helps them to see that side of it. So those are how I would answer those questions. So hopefully that was helpful. Now moving on to my lesson, I'm going to be doing a lesson about learning to read a map, following the Colorado State Standard 2 with geography for social studies. All right, so first of all, class, I want you to show me a thumbs up if you've ever had maybe a parent, or maybe you've seen one before, seen a map before, maybe last year. Okay, good. So I'm sure we've all seen maps before. Maybe you even remember last year learning a little bit about a map, but today we're going to kind of dive into it a little bit more and hopefully learn some more helpful information when it comes to learning to read a map. probably maybe one of the most common maps you've seen. This is a map of the United States. So maybe your parents have shown you this before, maybe last year you looked at this before. But this is one example of a type of map we might see in our lives. So this one again shows the 50 states. It's nice and colorful. We have lots of things going on here, but this is one example. Okay, you might have also seen a map that looks something like this. So this is a little bit different. Again, there's a little bit more pictures here on this map, and you can see there's a lake, there's lots of things happening, there's trees, there's buildings. So maybe you've seen more of a map like this where it kind of shows the land and kind of what's in the places. Maybe you've seen something like that before. Raise your hand if you've seen that before. Okay? Good. All right, so I guess to kind of tie it to biblical learning, why it's important to learn how to read a map as far as how it relates to the Bible, kind of why we as Christians should learn to read a map. I just want to relate it to kind of some things you might have seen in your Bible before, or when talking about the Bible. So here's a map of from Egypt to the Promised Land. So you might have seen this before, in that this is kind of showing the map, the way that the Egyptians went, and Moses took the Israelites. So maybe you've seen that when you're talking about the Israelites, talking about Moses. Maybe you've seen something like this. So again, this has kind of some of the route there. It has a compass on it, which we'll talk about a compass today, and what that kind of stands for. And then there's also some other things over here where you can see kind of what's happening at each event. Okay, so that's kind of one reason why it's important to learn how to read a map, so we can kind of know and understand what's happening in the Bible if we see kind of diagrams like this in our Bible or at Sunday school or something like that. Okay, this is another map you might have seen in your Bible before. This is a little more intense of a map. It's not quite as fun and colorful as the other one, but we can also learn how to read this. So this one looks a little bit more kind of intense than the other one maybe, but there's lots of cities here. There's the Mediterranean Sea here. So learning how to read a map, this is one that's more similar to what might be pictured in your actual Bible, like at the back of the Bible. So it's important to learn how to read a map. So we could even use those tools in our Bible, like the map at the back of the Bible, to help us kind of see what is back there and what that's like, and kind of help us as we're reading through the Bible and seeing like where Jesus was, things like that. Okay, another thing you might have seen maps used before, maybe you've gone to Disneyland with your family and seen, as you enter the park, they'll give you a little map of kind of where everything is located in the park. There's lots of kind of things that tell you what's here, where you could find the telephones, things like that with this map. So if you don't know how to read a map and you're given this, it'd be very hard to read, right? So we're going to talk about how you read a map. So hopefully, if you go to Disneyland or other places where they might give you a map, it'll help you read this so you actually know what this is saying, instead of just looking at the pictures and saying, oh, that's cool, but it actually shows you where lots of things are in the park. All right, so to start with, we're going to look at a map of Colorado, okay? So Colorado, where we live, is probably the best one to start with, because we want to know what's around us, right? We want to know what things Colorado has. Maybe you've been to some of these places before, but we can kind of see it on the map. So when looking at a map, I want to point out a few things that you'll notice on most maps. So starting off, you're going to see this key up here, okay? So the key tells you, it'll have a little symbol picture with it, and then it'll also say what that symbol or picture represents. So you'll see the star here represents the state capital. So we know that Denver is our state capital, right? And that's showing that that's where that's located, right there. Okay, then you'll see if there's a little dot next to it, that stands for a city. Okay, so you'll see some of the big cities here, like Colorado Springs is located on this map. We have Pueblo down here, Fort Collins up there. So kind of shows you that those are some of the big cities within Colorado that are important to note where they're at. Okay, and then we also have these little peak thingies standing for mountains, where the mountain ranges are located. Obviously, we know in Colorado, the mountains are pretty prevalent here. So you can see that all the little mountains are located right here in Colorado. So that's just one thing to note. You'll also note there's other things on the map that are not necessarily pointed out in the key here. And that's okay, not all keys for maps have every single thing that's on the map. So you'll notice there's like some of the important mountains, like Pikes Peak is here, Mount Elbert is here, and they didn't write that on the key, but they just wrote it on the map still. So it's still an important thing, but maybe they just didn't have the time or forgot to write it on the key right there. You'll also notice some other things. There's some national parks that are noted on here, national monument, and again, those aren't on the keys, but they're still a part of the map there. Okay, another important thing when looking at maps is this little compass right here. So this compass tells you which direction things are located. So we have north, east, south, and west. I like to remember it as never eat soggy waffles. Kind of a fun thing to think about. But again, it just shows you the direction. So we can know, okay, the mountains in Colorado are located to the west. So they're on this west part of the map. Okay, Denver is going to be north of Colorado Springs here. Okay, so just kind of the compass is a way to kind of show us where things are located on the map, and it's kind of helpful to see that. Okay, another thing we're going to talk about today as we're talking about maps is our continents and oceans. Now these are ones that's going to be important to be memorizing throughout this unit, and we're going to have a little assessment test at the end of the unit to kind of see if you've mastered all 7 continents and oceans. So starting with the continents, we have 7 continents. They are North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, and Antarctica. So to help us remember these 7 continents, I came up with a little song that you probably have heard before, but I'm going to sing it through one time, and then I'll have you guys join me and sing it as well. So here we go. It goes a little something like this. There's North and South America, there's Europe and there's Africa, there's Asia and Australia, and then Antarctica, the continents, the continents, the continents, the continents, the continents. All right, so that's how it goes, just a little something to kind of help you as you're thinking through the continents, and kind of maybe a little song will help you remember them in some way. So let's sing it through one more time together. So there's North and South America, there's Europe and there's Africa, there's Asia and Australia, and then Antarctica, the continents, the continents, the continents, the continents, the continents. All right, and then there's also the ocean. So we have the Pacific Ocean here, Atlantic Ocean, there's the Arctic Ocean way up there, the top, the Indian Ocean, and those are all the oceans. Okay, so those ones, I don't have a fun little song to remember the oceans. I'm sorry, but hopefully as you do some practice with different worksheets, hopefully those will start to become memorized as well, and you'll be able to remember those. All right, so talking about your work that you're going to do today, now that I've kind of talked about the different things on the map, you're going to do 2 different worksheets to help you remember these and practice these skills that we've talked about. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have this map of Colorado. So what I want you to do is you're going to color the rivers blue. Okay, you'll see the different rivers located here. You're going to color the whole state of Colorado green. And then I also want you to fill in the rest of the compass up there. You can see that way up there. You're also going to try and create a little key. Maybe kind of up here in this corner, you could create a little key with what's listed on the map here. And then I also want you to draw a picture of yourself where we're located. So Where we are, if you are just a little bit south of Denver here, so you can just draw a little picture there of you where you are at on this map to kind of help you visualize that and make sure you add that to your key as well. So that's the first worksheet. And then the second worksheet is just talking about the continents. So you have to just list each number. There's continents and oceans that are numbered, so just make sure you correspond the number to whatever continent or ocean it is. And I'll put the original drawing up on the screen for you to see today, because this is going to be practice for what you're actually going to do for the assessment at the end of the unit. So today you can use the picture, but try and kind of do it, see how much you can do without looking at the picture, and then at the end of the unit I will assess that and see how you guys do without seeing the picture. All right, are there any questions before you guys get started? So that's it for today's lesson. That's it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully that was helpful, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.